Hey guys, my name's Tanner. Welcome to my apartment. Today we're going to talk a little bit about signal flow, why it's important, how you can use it when you're running front of house audio and when you're troubleshooting while running front of house audio. So I'm excited to talk about this topic. Without further ado, here we go. Alright, so signal flow. Signal flow is pretty simple. It's basically what it sounds like, the flow of signal from the input section of the console to the output section of the console. So you have mics and lines and whatnot coming into the console. Stuff is happening to them in the console. It's happening in a process, in a linear process. And then it's being sent out of the console. It's called a mixer because all of these are coming in, they're being affected, they're being mixed, and multiple channels, anywhere from 2 to 32, are being combined and mixed together and sent out to one or more outputs. So, signal flow is made up of a few different sections. On our Behringer X32 at Cincinnati Christian University, there are 7 main sections of the signal flow that you will find in the console if you hit the home button and scroll all the way to the left to the home screen. And you'll see actually on that screen, it will show each module or section of the signal flow in order, the way that it's occurring. And what's good to know is that it is possible actually to change the order in which things flow. So it's always good to be able to go to that screen and see, okay, yeah, my compressor is in front of my EQ or after my EQ, or my insert is pre or post or whatever. We'll talk about that a little more here in a second. So those 7 main sections are preamp, gate, insert, EQ or equalization, dynamics or compressor as we often refer to it and use on it, the output section, and then also lumped in there is the bus send section. We'll talk about that here in a little bit. So basically what I want to do today is just go through, let you know what you'll find in each section, and then how you can rearrange things somewhat and what the outcome will be and why you would want to do that or not want to do that. So let's go over each section first, just so you kind of have a rough idea of what each one does. Preamp. So you'll find this on any audio console out there. It's also referred to as head amp, gain, trim. That's about all I've heard for it. Very inexperienced people might call it like the big volume, which isn't the best way to explain it, but it does kind of deal with initial level. The main thing that you'll find in preamp is that head amp gain, which is that rotary encoder at the top left-hand side of the console. And what that does is take input that's coming in and boost it up to a level that is usable for the rest of the console. What's very important about that is what sets initial level for the rest of the entire console. So if that is set incorrectly or poorly, then you're going to have trouble further on down the road. Other things that you'll find in the preamp section. So we have head amp gain, and you'll also find 2 little buttons, one for something called phase and one for something, it'll be plus 48 volts or phantom power. So if you watched episode number 1, which you should have, you'll know that plus 48 volts or phantom power is basically just electricity that's used to power condenser mics or other types of pro audio equipment that require a little bit of juice. So instead of having to plug them in separately, you can just have one XLR coming into them that is powering them and also receiving signal from them. The other thing that you'll find there is something called phase. We'll have a whole nother training video talking a little bit more about phase and how to use it in a front of house environment. What you need to know basically is that phase inverts the audio signal 180 degrees. And I just totally probably confused a lot of you with what that means. See me, we can talk about it a little bit if you want to learn more. So that's a basic overview of what you'll find in the preamp section. One good thing to know is that if you want to see an exploded view of the preamp section or any of the other sections of the console, at the bottom right-hand section or the bottom right-hand corner of that section there, you'll see a button that says View. If you press that button, it'll blow up on the screen that section alone. Instead of seeing everything, you'll just see the parameters for that section, which makes it a little bit easier to kind of manipulate, especially when you get into the more intense sections of the signal flow, such as dynamics or equalization. So next up, we have the gate. We always run gate pre. If you have a background in recording or anything, you can put different plugins wherever you want. We always run gate before inserts, EQs, and dynamics processing, just because it makes sense to do it that way. To me, anyways. Feel free to experiment and come out with some weird things for sure. Basically, what a gate does is it's kind of like an automatic mute or volume control. You have a threshold, and whenever an input signal drops below that threshold, it'll basically knee off the audio signal so that you don't have any unwanted outputs. It's used commonly on drum sets and on guitars that might have a bad hum. But yeah, gate in and of itself is the only thing that you're going to find in the gate section. But it is possible to move it around if you want. I always recommend keeping it pretty far up in the signal flow. Next up, you have the insert section. The insert is basically allows you to patch an outboard effect into the signal flow there. So anything from outboard compressors to pitch shifters to sub-octavers to anything like that, you can throw them in here. And it's also good to know that you can put this insert pre or post, meaning that it can be pre-equalization and dynamics or post-equalization and dynamics. And the reason you might do that is because you can patch a compressor in here. So sometimes you might want a compressor pre-EQ. Sometimes you might want a compressor post-EQ. So if you're using a compressor in that input section, it's nice because you can move where it is in the signal flow. So pitch shifters, outboard compressors, sub-octavers, and then all that fun, crazy stuff like flangers, junk like that no one ever uses unless you're like mixing a 70s rock and roll band and there's a drum break with some weird phasing, I don't know, whatever. All right, next section, EQ. You guys should know what EQ does. If you don't, the best way to explain EQ is a gain control for a certain group of frequencies. So instead of the preamp or head amp control that controls the entire gain for all frequencies, this is a gain control specifically for a band of frequencies that you select. So EQ is a very powerful tool. This is kind of like the center stone for our signal flow. So in these other sections where you can adjust pre and post, they move themselves corresponding to the equalizer on our X32. So if you're adjusting where the compressor or the dynamics section is and you say pre, it's going to move it pre-equalizer. If you say post, it's going to put it post-equalizer. Same way with the insert. If the insert is pre, it's going to be pre-EQ. If it's post, it's going to be post-EQ. So EQ is kind of like that, just middle of the road. And the reason it is because it's on every channel. It's a very, very important tool, and it's present everywhere on the console. So it's just a good rule of thumb to be able to move from. So EQ, that's where you can do your sculpting, all that stuff. Going into dynamics, here's where you're going to find like your expanders, your compressors, all that fun stuff. So it's commonly accepted in the pro audio field that you put compressor post EQ, and that's for a number of reasons. Number one is that you don't want to hit a compressor with information that is unnecessary. So we've talked about a low cut filter or a high pass filter before, which is used very commonly on vocals, electric guitars, acoustic guitars, just about everything that isn't a bass drum or a bass guitar or a synth or something like that. If the compressor is pre-equalizer, it's possible that you would be hitting the compressor with low-end content that isn't making its way out of the console anyways. So if this dynamic section is actually pre-EQ, then you're not doing anything with the EQ to remove low end from the signal. So when it moves into the compressor section, you might be hitting that compressor with low end information that is making it sound off. So you might be hitting it with some of those plosives that we've talked about that are peaking the compressor when normally nothing would be happening. So that's something to pay attention to. Though with some inputs like a bass drum or something like that, it's totally appropriate to have a compressor pre. I encourage you to kind of mix it up, play with it, see what you like. You might get some interesting things out of it. It is possible that if you're using extreme compression with maybe some odd attack and release times, you can really change the tonality of an instrument. And if that's the case, you might want to have the equalizer post so that you could kind of sculpt out some of those tonal changes that you made using the compressor to kind of achieve more of the sound that you're looking for. It would be more difficult to do that if the EQ was pre. So then lastly here we have the output, which is basically your send to the stereo or mono bus. This is where I want to take a section really just to talk about why signal flow is so important. So we've talked about the term gain staging before, and basically what gain staging means is anywhere in the signal flow where you're adding or taking away gain is referred to a gain stage. And that can be kind of just viewed as one of these head amp like volume controls anywhere along the point in the path. So from like say the fader that's in between, like the fader that's actually on the console is in between the dynamic section and the output right there. There's a fader here. I don't know how to spell fader. In between that fader on the output section and the output bus is a rotary encoder that says, okay, I only want to send this much to the fader after. I only want to send this much to the main bus after the fader. So actually, there's two of them mixed up right here. What's important to know is that you don't want to be adjusting that gain in 10 different places along the signal path, because all that's going to do later is confuse you. You're gonna say, man, I don't have like nearly as much vocal as I need front of house. Why is that? It doesn't make any sense. Well, maybe it's because you came in and edited at one point in time a certain gain stage and you're taking off 10 or 12 dB off of it. Then you're jacking your fader at the beginning of the signal flow to try and make up for it. All of this is to say, pick one gain stage. 90% of the time, that gain stage is going to be the fader that is present on the channel bank in the first two layers of the X32. Let that be your main gain stage. Let that be adjusting how much of that channel is being sent out to buses or your main outputs, etc. So in the output section, you'll find routing to send a channel to the stereo, the left and right output, or the mono output. We are running mono at CCU, so it's important to know that you just want that being sent to the mono output. And yeah, so that's pretty much the included signal flow here. The last little thing we should talk about is the bus sends. So buses are basically kind of like sub mixes. They're like not a mix that's going to front of house or anything, but a smaller mix of maybe only a certain few instruments or inputs that you can throw on one fader that makes them easier to control. So the most commonly used example would be like a drum bus. So instead of me having to control 8 inputs, bass drum, kick, what if there's 2 bass drum mics, 2 snare mics, tom, 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 overhead, hat. You're talking about like mass inputs. So if I wanted to change the overall level of the drums, I'd be over here like grabbing 20 faders and moving them like this, as compared to routing them all to a bus where I can move just one. Also, anytime you're using in-ears, it kind of gets a little dicey because we have 32 inputs but only 16 outputs on our in-ear system. So what do? Like, you just run out of outputs for everyone to hear themselves. So sometimes we'll throw those things on bus outs and condense the number of channels that we have to send to the P16 in-ear monitors. So if we have a drummer that's using 3 toms, instead of sending 3 separate outputs to the P16s, we might throw those P16s on one bus and route them all to one of the P16 outputs. And what's nice about these is they can be patched just digitally for uses like that, but you can also send them either mono or stereo to a physical output. So like we run what's called an aux-fed sub, meaning that the signal that's going to our sub isn't fed from the main output fader. It's actually fed totally separately through one of these bus sends. It's number 8. That being said, you have to choose what you want to send to the subwoofer, meaning you have to send whatever instruments you want into that bus send. So I know this is all kind of aloof. I tried to keep it simple. The problem is this is a little bit of a rabbit hole. So you start talking about this, then you get into gain staging, then you get into different parameters and how they should be set, all that. So I hope at least you learned a couple things from this. If you need any questions answered specifically, feel free to shoot me an email at tanner.daniels@ccuuniversity.edu. Thanks so much for stopping in today and joining me in my cute little apartment. Looking forward to seeing you guys again soon.